So welcome to this month's episode of Wild Sarasota. This month, we're going to be talking about the falcon species here in Florida. But before we do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and where I work, and then we'll launch into some general information about raptors before we start talking about the specific species of falcons here in Florida. So I'm Dr. Catherine Clements. I'm the Ecology and Natural Resources educator here at University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sarasota County. And in my position, I provide all sorts of educational programming for youth and adults and assist our community with questions and concerns about wildlife, native and invasive species. I do programs on the health benefits of nature, and I also do in-person eco walks at our county parks and preserves. My background is in environmental studies, bachelor's of science from State University of New York in Buffalo, where I am originally from, although apparently they're having feet of snow, like many feet of snow yesterday and today. So I guess I'm very happy to be down here in Sarasota, even though it's like 60 degrees today. I also had a foray as a physician. So I have a Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine degree from Bastyr University out in Seattle, and spent over a decade as a physician before I decided to come full circle back to environmental education. And I've been here with the Extension Office in Sarasota County for about 6 years now. Also, I lived for many years, almost 2 decades, in Oscar Scherer State Park with my husband, who at the time was the park manager. So no matter what I was doing in my professional career, I was always immersed in nature personally. And so if you aren't familiar with extension offices, there is an extension office associated with all 67 counties in the state of Florida, as well as extension offices in other states, because they are part of the mission of land-grant universities. And our extension office is a partnership between the University of Florida, Sarasota County, and the USDA. And we provide the research and resources of the university to our local communities to help address issues, concerns, just difficulties or things people are wanting more education about here at a local level. So in Sarasota County, because we're a mix of rural and urban communities, we have a wide variety of programming areas, anything from agriculture to natural resources, health, sustainability. Certainly gardening is a big focus, as well as 4-H youth development of almost all of our extension offices across the state. So besides my class, hopefully you will find other things you are interested in and take other classes both here at our office or virtually through Zoom. These are just some of the program logos of some of the major programs offered in our office. I already saw a couple of my Florida Master Naturalist students that are on the webinar today, so welcome. Often there's a few Master Gardeners as well. So these are 2 programs that train adults to assist our community. The Master Gardeners obviously are out in our community volunteering and helping people with gardening, which is a difficult thing to do here in Florida. We also have Master Gardeners right here at our office Monday through Thursday to answer questions about gardening and your plants in your lawn, landscape, and garden. And then that Master Naturalist program, that is one that I'm a lead instructor for, and it is an adult education program through the University of Florida. It's offered throughout our state at different locations, but there are now 11 or 12 classes. They are either 24-hour or 40-hour classes that are all about Florida's environment and the plants and animals that live here in the state with us. So if you love that sort of stuff, I highly recommend the Florida Master Naturalist program. It is my absolute favorite thing. All right, so let's launch into talking first a little bit about raptors in general. So I have a number of webinars on raptors. So they all sort of start out with just a little bit of general information about that group of birds. So a raptor is a bird of prey. They're often large, but not always, but most often people think of things like eagles and hawks when we talk about raptors. So they are carnivorous. They, depending on the type of raptor, they eat anything from mammals, large or small, to fish or other birds, or even insects and invertebrates, or even things like snakes and frogs. Raptors are characterized by having 8 sharp talons, 4 on each feet. And those feet are very strong and are utilized to grasp their prey. And some raptors will actually use their talons to kill their prey as well. Most raptors have a very strong hooked upper beak that they use to pull apart their food. And some raptors, like the falcons that we're talking about today, will actually use their beak to kill their prey. And Latin, the talons is Latin for grasping or seizing. So they have well-developed eyes. You can see from some of these pictures how large their eyes are. They often take up a large percentage of their overall skull. And whenever you're looking at the skull of an animal, often you can tell what sensory apparatus they use the most in their environment by how much space that takes up in their skull. So for instance, if you think about dogs, they often have a very large, long snout because most dogs will use their sense of smell primarily in their environment. So here our raptors are using their sense of sight. Some raptors, like the falcons we're going to talk about today, can have sight that is 8 to 10 times better than us humans. And they have these cool features of having 3 eyelids. They actually have something called a nictitating membrane, which alligators have as well. But that nictitating membrane helps to clear their eye and protect their eye, sort of keep it clean and safe. And that is a relatively clear membrane that can just go over the eye to create those functions. And what services do raptors provide to our ecosystem? Well, they are, of course, a predator, often an apex predator, depending on which raptor we're talking about. And that helps to keep our ecosystem in balance. So they are eating sometimes our mesopredators or our pests like rodents. And so they help us not be overrun by things like rodents and snakes and raccoons and other things that we just might not want to have too much of an abundance of. So they help that balance. They are also an indicator of environmental health. Probably the most famous story of that is the decimation of the bald eagle population due to DDT being used in our environment and affecting how the calcium is deposited in the eggshells of our large raptors like bald eagles. And we also have some DDT effects in the falcons that we're going to talk about today as well. So in some of these apex predators, they are potentially going to be a biomagnification of the pollution in our environment. And so as they eat a lot of smaller prey, all of the pollution that has been harbored in the prey body is then going to potentially be concentrated in that larger apex predator, causing it potential health complications or even becoming fatal for that raptor. And this is just a long list of many different types of raptors that can be found throughout our continent, actually, throughout North America. We don't have all of these in Florida. The 4 falcons we're going to talk about are listed there, but we also have many other types of raptors that basically I cover all of these except condors in other webinar presentations. So a little bit about phylogeny or taxonomy, which is the classification of living organisms. And generally, living organisms are classified based on shared characteristics. And now that we have the ability to study DNA, sometimes that's changing some of these classifications. But I'm just going to show you some of these basically because they help to indicate also what other webinars and what species are covered in those other webinars. So everything on this slide belongs to the animal kingdom. They are vertebrates, so they're in the phylum Chordata, and they are birds, so they are in the class Aves. And this is then broken down into order. Oh, this is always a hard word, Accipitriformis. I'm pretty close. And within that order, on this slide, we have a couple different families. We have the Accipitridae, or the accipiters, and this includes our hawks under Buteo, and our accipiters, which are our Cooper's hawk and our sharp-shinned hawk, and then also northern harrier, which is in a different genus. So all of these are covered in the hawk webinar, which is available for you to watch on YouTube, and I'm going to give you a link to how you find that later in case you're interested. Eagles, because they're so cool, have their very own webinar, and it's mostly focused on the bald eagle because we don't have very many golden eagles here in Florida. And then next month, I'll be doing what I'm calling the other raptor webinar, because it's basically all the raptors on this slide and the next slide that I haven't covered in any other webinar. So next month, we're going to talk about kites. We're going to talk about the osprey, and we're going to talk about the vultures. So that's next month if you want to join us. And I have the date and the time at the end of this webinar on a slide. And then I also have a webinar on owls, and we cover the different species of owls that can be found here in Florida. But today, here's what we're going to talk about. Up here on the top is genus Falco and genus Caracara that are all in family Falconidae. And so this is 3 of the genus Falco, and then of course the Caracara, which is in its own genus. So these are the 4 species of falcons that are found here in Florida. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between hawks and falcons, because honestly, I'm a lot more familiar with hawks than I am with falcons, because I feel like I just don't see falcons around that much. I feel like they're a little less common probably in numbers in general, but they also, I think, are a little more secretive as well. Whereas hawks will be just hanging out in trees and on electric wires and things like that, and they're pretty obvious. Both of these species are diurnal, but hawks just seem to be more obvious to me than falcons. So hawks and falcons, of course, are in slightly different orders, so they have some differences. Hawks tend to be medium to large size birds of prey, whereas falcons tend to be small to medium birds of prey. So falcons overall tend to be a little bit smaller than most of our hawks. Hawks have worldwide quite a large number of species, 250 species of hawks worldwide, whereas falcons only have 66 species worldwide. And then there's only 6 species in North America of falcons. And of course, 4 of those 6 are here in Florida. So they both have hooked beaks. Hawks have very visible nostrils in their beaks, and falcons use those hooked beaks that to actually kill their prey, whereas hawks are going to use their feet and their strong talons to kill their prey. They both have sharp, curved, strong talons because they're both raptors, but they use them slightly differently. Hawks and falcons have pretty different wing structures. So hawks have broad wings for soaring, whereas falcons have longer pointed wings for maneuvering. Sometimes they're called sort of scythe shape. They look like, like one of those scythes that was used to cut grain and grasses in the olden days. And that's because their wing structure, and you'll see this in some of the pictures, is going to be a lot more pointed at sort of the elbow. And overall, their primary flight feathers are going to be longer and narrower than hawks, than hawks. Hawks are going to have prominent round eyes, and so do falcons, but falcons are going to have brown eyes, whereas many of our hawks are going to have more golden eyes. Both have very keen eyesight. Both use their eyesight for hunting. Both generally mate for life. And they both exhibit sexual dimorphism, which means when there's a difference in their physical characteristics between males and females. And so in this case, and that can be a variety of different things, it can even be coloration, but in this case, the sexual dimorphism that we are talking about with almost all of our raptors is that females tend to be larger. Sometimes males are a third smaller than females even. Falcons also have excellent hearing, and they are very swift flyers. Depending on the falcon we talk about, there's quite a range. And also there's some range in the research that's been done. But for instance, we're going to talk about the peregrine falcon next, which is considered one of our fastest birds in the world. And they have been clocked over 200 miles per hour, actually. And then some research estimates indicate that they might be able to fly at 238 miles per hour. And then some of our falcons also migrate thousands of miles, which some of our hawks do as well. All right, so as we mentioned, as we get deeper into falcons, there are 66 different species worldwide, and they are in every continent except Antarctica. And then 6 are in North America, and 4 of those species can be found here in Florida. Falcons are found in a wide array of habitats. That's how they are able to survive on all different continents. And we already talked about some of their physical characteristics, like their hooked bill, their sharp talons, and their pointed wings, and that females are typically larger than males. They will eat a wide variety of things, sometimes depending on the species of falcon, but even some of our falcons are a little bit more of a generalist than we might think when we start talking about raptors and we think they're just eating, one thing like fish or mammals or birds. Many of our falcons, especially the caracara, will eat carrion, which of course is dead animals. We talked about them attacking their prey with their beaks, not their talons. You can see the brown eyes in this photo, and they usually nest in trees. Pairs usually mate for life, just like the hawks do, and they often return to the same nest site year after year. So falco comes from a Latin word that translates as scythe. So once again, that sort of triangular or pointed shape to the wings. And those wings are thin and tapered, which allows them to fly at those really high speeds and change direction rapidly. Unlike owls, owls have even broader wings than hawks do. So owls glide a lot. They have often slower flapping motions to their wings, and they have the adaptation of silent flight, which falcons do not, but falcons maneuver much better than some of our larger raptors with those broad wings. Fledgling falcons also have even longer flight feathers throughout their first year. And this allows them to learn the necessary skills to become an effective hunter in their later life. So there's this really cool thing called the Feather Atlas, and this is part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so here I've pulled some pictures that I just think are fascinating to see. And if you ever find a feather, it's actually illegal to pick up and carry or own feathers from birds other than game birds. So across our United States, our federal government protects almost all of our birds except the game birds. And so you're not allowed to have their feathers, their skulls, their eggs or eggshells, or even their nests. But if you see a feather, you can always take a picture of it, go home, bring up the Feather Atlas, and I'll share at the end of the presentation, I have the link, so I can share that in the chat box with you guys. But it's a great way to try to identify what feather you took a picture of. It's also just neat to compare some of these different birds and their feathers. And usually in the Feather Atlas, they'll have their primary wing feather photos like you see here. They'll have their secondary wing feather photos, and then they also will have their tail feathers, which I have a couple pictures of tail feathers later on in the presentation as well. But here's a comparison between the juvenile on the left-hand side of your screen, peregrine falcon primary flight feathers, and the adult peregrine falcon primary flight feathers. So they don't look all that different to me. There seems to be a little bit difference in size and shape between them. Obviously, there's some difference in coloration because juvenile birds tend to have a different coloration than when they molt into their adult plumage. But just really neat to have an opportunity to see these in a way that is safe and, of course, legal as well. So our peregrine falcon is one of our largest falcons in North America. I have sort of its height there and its wingspan. So it's got pretty decent wingspan. That's, 3.5, almost 4 feet of wingspan, and they're 14 to 19 inches tall. Adults are bluish gray on top with barred underparts and a dark head with thick sideburns. Wings are long and pointed with those long primary feathers, creating that size-shaped wing that we've been talking about. And they also have a pretty long tail. And of course, females are larger than males. Here's a couple pictures of juvenile peregrine falcons. So with many of our birds, especially with our raptors, your juvenile birds are potentially going to be larger than the adult. So sometimes that is true, for instance, definitely true with eagles. So the juveniles can be a little bit larger, but they're often more drab in color until they molt into their adult plumage. So you can see here that they are dark and heavily marked. They have vertical streaks on their breast and chest. So really obvious right here, that vertical streak instead of the horizontal. Let me see if I can find. So this, to me, I don't really think of this really as horizontal, but it's definitely more horizontal than vertical. So this is an adult. And you can see there's more like horizontal sort of dots across the chest, whereas in our juveniles, it's much darker and more vertical in nature. And you're not really seeing that slate bluish gray yet. You're seeing mostly brown and buff color. And this one, of course, has a bird right there that it's snacking on. So here's more of the adult plumage here, where you can see more of that grayish, maybe almost bluish, very obvious sort of dark head and this mustache appearance here. Peregrine falcons also have one of the longest migration patterns of all birds in North America. Some of them have been known to migrate as far as over 15,000 miles in a year. And peregrine also is defined as wanderer or traveler. So much about this bird's name speaks to its behavior and its physical characteristics. And you really see those scythe-shaped wings there. See that really great point that they can hold their wings this way in flight and maneuver really well and dive. And then when they actually dive, which is when they reach those really high speeds, they will draw their wings into their body and dive almost straight down after prey. And that's when they can reach those really high speeds. When they're flying in what we call straight line flight, they're not going to be as fast, but they're still pretty fast. Let's see. All right, here we go. They're going to eat mostly medium-sized birds, and that dive that they do is called a stoop. So they have also learned to live really well around us humans, and you've probably seen them on TV. There's a couple famous peregrine falcon pairs that live in some of our large cities. And so in those cities, they'll hunt pigeons. They do a great job of finding food locally by eating those pigeons in those urban areas. In more natural areas, they're going to feed mainly on shorebirds and ducks. And generally, the peregrine falcon is going to eat about 2.5 ounces of food daily, which is equivalent to about the size of 2 blackbirds. They attack by biting through the neck of their prey. So they will catch their prey on wings. So they're going to be flying or diving to catch their prey, and they're going to grab it and bite through that the vertebrae in the spinal cord. It's really amazing. The research has documented them consuming 450 different species of birds, from things as small as a hummingbird all the way up to birds as big as sandhill cranes. Although my guess would be that those are young sandhill cranes and probably not the full adults, which are much bigger than a peregrine falcon. But it still is just phenomenal to think that they eat so many different species of birds. Most common, of course, are the shorebirds, water birds, and smaller songbirds, but they will also eat bats as well. And they're not afraid to steal food from other raptors, so they will chase or come after other raptors to take their prey that they have caught. So who eats peregrine falcons? So they are not necessarily an apex predator because there are larger raptors that eat them. Sometimes other peregrine falcons will eat smaller peregrine falcons, but definitely eagles and great horned owls will take a peregrine falcon as a meal if they can catch them. So here's a nesting falcon with some chicks. They will nest on tall man-made or natural structures. So depending on where we're finding them, they may nest on towers or tall buildings. Here in Florida, they'll nest there, but they'll also nest in quarries because we don't really have very many cliffs here in Florida. So in other parts of the country, they like to nest in cliffs especially. And sometimes upwards of elevations of 12,000 feet. And they do commonly like to be along the coast as well. They don't build a nest. They usually scrape a depression into whatever area they're in. That's about 2 inches deep by about 9 inches wide. And they'll lay 2 to 5 eggs once a year. So there's the details on their fast flight. While they're doing that straight line flight, they'll fly anywhere from like 25 to 70 miles per hour. So if they're traveling long distances, of course, they're going to be doing a marathon. So they're going to be going slower probably and going about 25 to 34 miles per hour. But they can pursue prey up to 69 miles per hour, according to the research. But once again, once they take that dive, when they tuck their wings in and they just go for it, they're so aerodynamic and they can dive from heights of up to 300 to 3,000 feet and can reach over 200 miles per hour. Just really phenomenal. So there are other birds. Hummingbirds are also very fast flyers. In fact, bats, which of course are not a bird, but a mammal, are also very fast, or some of them are. I believe it's the Brazilian free-tailed bat that can fly upwards of 180 or 190 miles per hour. So the peregrine falcon does have a few rivals for being the fastest bird or animal on Earth. But that diving stoop at 200 or 238 miles per hour is pretty fast. Hard to beat that. So I just really like this picture. This obviously is not in Florida, but I really liked the cliff picture of the pair that is probably nesting up there. So I wanted to share that with you all and tell you a little bit about some conservation efforts. So peregrine falcons were virtually eradicated from eastern North America due to poisoning from DDT in the mid-1900s. So DDT was a pesticide that was used worldwide basically, but gained a lot of popularity during wartime because it was really useful for sort of getting rid of pest insects like lice from barracks where people were in close contact with each other. It was also used for, I believe, malaria by killing mosquitoes. So it had a decent amount of use throughout our continent and other areas of the world. But in the later mid-1900s, there was a huge conservation effort when we realized how it was impacting many of our birds of prey that had bioaccumulated DDT through the prey they were eating. And this is the reason that bald eagles were listed as endangered. And then even our peregrine falcons were first listed as endangered in 1970 due to them being basically extirpated from the eastern part of our continent. So DDT ended up being banned for most use. There are a few little loopholes where it can still be used, but it's banned from most use in our country starting in 1972, and we had significant recovery efforts for the species beginning in 1974. So researchers at Cornell University and then other places as well bred peregrine falcons in captivity. They would take the hatchlings once they were about 3 weeks old and place them in what's called hack sites, which are like nest boxes where the humans can still feed the young and take care of them and monitor their health until they are ready to fledge, but they sort of do it from behind the box or from the side of the box in a way that the birds are allowed to develop as if they were in the wild and don't bond to those humans. More than 6,000 peregrines have been released since 1974 due to this and similar recovery efforts. So they've made an incredible rebound and were declassified in 1999 and are no longer a listed species and are now regularly seen in many large cities and coastal areas. So like the bald eagle, this is one of our conservation success stories. So I just want to mention a little bit about falconry. I don't really know much about it personally, but peregrine falcons are one of the birds that are often used in falconry, which is the taking of wild quarry in its natural state and habitat by means of a trained raptor. So peregrine falcons are not the only birds that are used in this pursuit. There's there's hawks and many other types of raptors that are used in falconry, but this is one of the more historic and common birds that is used. Just a note about, once again, I've already mentioned that all birds, especially all raptors, are protected by federal and usually also protected by state law. So all of them are protected federally anyways. And this is something that you need to train for. The training is 7 years or more in order to be able to do this. You need to also have permits in order to have a bird and to practice with raptors. So this is not something that the average person is going to choose to do. But it is one of the things that's actually been credited in terms of the ability for the conservation efforts and the breeding program in captivity to be so successful, because this was a bird that already some of the birds had already been very used to being in captivity. We think that's why part of that breeding effort was so successful, because many wild species just don't breed successfully once they're in captivity. And there is a North American Falconers Association. So if you want to learn more about falconry, you can take a look at that. All right, so I'm going to jump into our American kestrel now, our second bird that we're talking about today. This one is about the size of a dove, so it's quite a bit smaller, almost half the size actually of our peregrine falcon. So this is North America's smallest falcon at about 8.5 to 12 inches in height, with a wingspan of about 20 to 24 inches. It's one of our more colorful raptors. Here you see a male male American kestrel on your slide. Males have a slate blue head and wings with a rusty red colored back and tail. And you really see that tail there. It's so beautiful and so obvious. Females have a smaller bit of slate blue on their heads, and their wings are not really slate blue. They're more reddish brown with dark bands. Female tail feathers do not have this striking rusty red with that really obvious black band and then the white tips. Our female tail feathers are going to have more thin dark bands against the rusty brown. I think I have a picture to show you in a second. So very different in their tail plumage. So, and often that's what we see when they're flying. So really easy, I think, to tell the males apart from other species of raptors, maybe not as easy to tell the females. Both sexes have pale buff breasts, so sort of that beigey with maybe a little rusty red. They have pairs of black vertical slashes on the sides of their pale faces. And once again, we call those sometimes mustaches or sideburns. All right, so here is, okay, so to me, the one on the left looks like a female, and it's got one of those rodents. And this one on the right is definitely a male. So little bit of difference, and you can already see if you look here, you can't really see a lot of the tail in this photo, but you definitely can see, even from the little bit of the tails that you see on the male, you see that rusty red with that black band at the tip. And then our female is going to have more of a barred tail. So I've given you some tail feather pictures here to make that really obvious. So we've got our male here. So you've got that rusty red, that really thick black bar, and then those white tips on their tail feathers. And then here on the female tail feathers, they're rusty, but they have those thin, darker bars, and they don't have that thick black bar or white tip on the end. So our Southern American kestrels that we're going to find here are less likely to migrate than their northern counterparts. So in South Florida, kestrels are generally year-round residents. And this one's a great picture. You can really see those two facial bars there. They prefer open areas with short ground vegetation and sparse trees. So they could be found in meadows and grasslands and other parts of the country in deserts. They're also going to be found in parks, farm fields, cities, and suburbs. Here in the Southeast, they will also breed in longleaf pine and sandhill habitat. They like to, especially when breeding, perch on wires or poles. They hover facing into the wind. And remember, they're so much smaller. So if it's really windy, they can actually be tossed around, and you might see them flapping and adjusting their tails in order to stay in place. When they perch, they also do that pumping tail motion that some birds do. So that might be a way to help you identify them. They are cavity nesters, and they need access to at least a few trees or structures that will provide either a natural hollowed out area, or they will use old woodpecker cavities in trees. They don't make their own cavities, so they need something that provides that for them in order to nest in. They also will nest in boxes. So I have a little bit of information on that, I think, on the next slide. They have 4 to 5 eggs, and they can have 1 or 2 broods yearly. So here's some information that I got from the Peregrine Fund about nest boxes. So if you're interested in learning more about putting up or having nest boxes for American kestrels, this would be a great place to look. Because all birds sort of require, if they are even going to nest in a box, because not all birds will nest in boxes. So if they are going to nest in a box, usually there are some specific parameters that particular species of birds is going to utilize. So here we see they need to be 8 to 20 feet off the ground, with 10 feet being the preferred height. They need to be at least half a mile apart. You want to put them up during the non-breeding season and in open habitat and away from loud roadways. And then you want to add fresh bedding to prevent the eggs from rolling, and replace that bedding annually in the fall. So once again, if you go to, I can put this link in the chat box at the end if you'd like me to, or you can just Google them, but they have blueprints on how to build your own box. So you can find out the actual dimensions. Sometimes, depending on the bird, there's also a certain diameter hole that they will enter through, or a certain placement of that hole on the box. So those are all really important things to understand if you want to make your own box. They also have tips and tricks for success and a protocol to become a partner with the Peregrine Fund if you are going to have a nest box, so that you can monitor your box and help provide information to them that helps with researching and understanding these birds. Here's a beautiful picture of a male. You really see that slate blue cap, the slate blue on the wings, the rusty red back, and then once again, this very obvious, beautiful rusty red tail with that black bar and white tips. So they are going to eat, because remember, they're a lot smaller. So they're going to eat actually a bunch of insects and other invertebrates, but they will also take small rodents and birds. They might eat small snakes, lizards, and frogs, and maybe even an occasional small squirrel. They will pounce and snatch their prey from the ground using their feet to seize it. And they will either eat it right then and there, or they'll bring it back to its perch to finish it off. They'll also hide surplus kills in clumps of grass, tree roots, fence posts, cavities, to save that food for themselves for later, or to hide it from thieves if they're being pursued by some other birds in the moment. And who eats these guys? Well, remember, because they're smaller, more birds are probably going to be able to eat them. So many of our hawks, barn owls will eat them, even American crows, as well as some of our snakes like rat snakes and corn snakes will eat them. And fire ants can get into their cavities occasionally, just depending on where the cavity is, and wreak some havoc with the young hatchlings as well. So some fun facts about kestrels: like most other birds, they can see ultraviolet light. So they have actually been seen sort of tracking voles, which are a tiny rodent, like a mole basically, but small. They've been shown to track the urine trails of voles in order to capture them as a delicious snack. So the urine gives off like a certain type of ultraviolet light that they can see. I think that's sort of amazing. And then amazing but gross is that young kestrels actually squirt their feces on their cavity walls, and they leave bits of prey in the nest. And some of the other raptors do this as well, but you can just imagine they are not great housekeepers, and their nests are smelly, smelly places. All right, falcon number 3, the merlin. So these are also small, but they're in between the size of a peregrine falcon, which is one of our largest, and the smallest, which we just talked about, the kestrel. So merlins are in the middle. They're about 9.5 to 12 inches tall with 21 to 27 inch wingspan. There are 3 subspecies of merlins in North America, and then there are 6 more in Eurasia. The 3 here in North America, there's a Pacific Northwest black merlin, and they're all just slightly differently colored. And then obviously are in different geographic locations as well. So those Pacific Northwest black merlins are very dark overall, almost black. The prairie merlins, which are in the Midwest states, are pale gray with a lighter buff or light gray breast. And then the taiga species, which are the most commonly found and sort of the widest found geographically in our continent, and also the ones that are the most likely that we're going to see in Florida. The taiga species can be a rich brown or medium gray above with dark streaking on their breast and a thin white eyebrow. So all of these different colorations have heavily streaked chests. Sometimes they're just darker than other subspecies. The underwings tend to be dark, and their dark tail has narrow white bands, as you see in this wonderful photo here. This bird did a great job of posing for us so we could see those tail feathers. And they tend to lack the facial mustache stripe. And some of them you can see a little bit of that mustache, but more often you're going to see that bar or that eyebrow by the eye. And that's true here. You see a little bit of a bar here by the eye, but you don't see the mustache is there, but you don't really see it. It's not as noticeable as in the previous falcons we talked about. So they are going to be residents in some areas and long distance migrants in other areas. So the Merlins of the Northwest tend to live there year round or move short distances during the winter. Most of the prairie Merlins migrate longer distances and move into southern or central US and northern Mexico, although some of them will remain in urban areas year round. And then the taiga form migrates, it just depends on where they are. Some of them are really far north and they will migrate all the way to the coastal and southern US and as far south as Ecuador. So the taigas I mentioned is the one that we're more commonly going to see here in Sarasota and in Florida. And we're going to see them in the winter when they're down here to stay warm. They are a true snowbird. So habitat, they are going to like to nest in forested openings and along edge habitats and also along coastal areas and rivers. They also have begun nesting in towns and cities, and they will use crows or hawks' nests that have been abandoned. They are monogamous, like many of our raptors are. But 80% of Merlins find new mates each year. So most of our raptors and most of our falcons, the other 3 falcons that we're talking about, mate for life unless their mate dies. And if their mate dies, they generally will find a new mate. But Merlins are just mating and staying monogamous just for that 1 year, and then they're going to go out and look for somebody else, the majority of them. So they will eat small songbirds and shorebirds that they find in open areas. They are small yet fierce falcons. So mostly medium-sized birds that are about 1 to 2 ounces, and they catch them once again in midair during high-speed attacks, which is typical of most of our falcons. Here are some of the common sort of songbird species that they are known to eat. Horned lark, house sparrows, waxwings, dickcissels, the least sandpiper, dunlin, and some other shorebirds. So sort of those, small to medium-sized packages of food for them. They will also, like our smaller kestrel, eat some of our larger insects like dragonflies. They'll eat bats as well, and they will also take some small mammals. They also have been seen pairing up to hunt, which is sort of interesting, and attacking their prey at high speed. They will attack it either horizontally or from below, and they will chase their prey upwards until they either catch it or get too tired. So unlike the peregrine falcon, which is more often diving for its prey, they might be catching their prey from below. And then things that eat a Merlin are larger raptors, of course. So many of our hawks, our peregrine falcon, and our great horned owl. Great horned owls really, they'll eat a bunch of mammals. They'll eat even large rabbits and squirrels and things like that. But our great horned owls also will take a lot of our bats and other birds. Fun facts. So this is another one of our raptor species that was impacted by DDT, but is partially due to their ability to survive in urban areas. They have recovered very well from those declines. They have a typical flight speed of about 30 miles per hour, but it can be faster when they're chasing prey. And you can tell them apart from the larger falcons by rapid wing beats and their overall darker tones. And they rarely glide. They used to be called pigeon hawks because when flying, they look somewhat pigeon-like. And their species name, Columbarius, is actually Latin for dove because they look a little bit like them when they're flying. All right. So I saved my favorite for last for you guys. I just love caracaras. I just think they're so unique. They're really beautiful. I sort of feel like somebody just took a bunch of physical characteristics and behaviors from other raptors and pasted them all together, and we ended up with crested caracaras, and then just sprinkled them with a bunch of magic and made them so beautiful with that bright orange facial skin and those bright yellow orange legs too. So also, they live in sort of unique habitats. So they're somewhat hard to find unless you know where to look for them. So I actually went looking for one to take a picture of for you guys a week or so ago. So I didn't get great pictures, but I'm going to share some of my pictures with you. And I'll tell you where you can try looking for them as well. So they are a large tropical black and white falcon with a black crest on their head. So that when the crest is sort of down, but sometimes it'll be up a little bit more and will look a little shaggier. They have that bright orange face, legs and feet. They look a little bit like a hawk. They have that sharp beak and talons, but their behavior is more similar to that of a vulture. They also, I once saw one somewhere where I just wasn't expecting to see it. I think I also was a little tired, and I saw it in flight, and I don't usually see them in flight. I usually see them on fence posts or on the ground. So I think I was a little taken aback and a little confused at first, and it actually looked a little bit like a bald eagle to me. And I'm going to show you some flight pictures so you might see why I made that mistake initially. And then my brain clicked in and I went, wait a second, that's not a bald eagle. What is that? And then I figured it out. And how I figured it out was when I saw that same one land on the ground to eat some, it had actually gotten a piece of a dead cow. It was at an agricultural site. And when I saw it eating that meat on the ground, I was like, oh, now I know what it is. It's a crested caracara. So in flight, you'll notice this bird's long, straight wings and diamond-shaped tail with those noticeable bright white undertail and outer flight feathers, which part of this, so you can see it's partially got a white head and it's partially got a white tail. And that's how for a moment I got a little confused and thought it was a bald eagle. And they're pretty big. They aren't anywhere near as big as bald eagles, but they are quite large. They're about the size of a vulture. So once again, I wanted to just show you some feathers. This time I have primary wing feathers. So you can see in the wing, there is going to be some white, but also a lot of the dark blackish brown. And then you can see in the tail feathers, there's definitely a lot of white in the tail that is tipped with a bar of black. So here are my photos. Once again, not great, but why I decided to include them is also you don't always see a bird really up close like a beautiful photo. Sometimes this is how you see birds. You see them from a distance, flying, moving around. You're not quite sure what you saw. So I thought I would include these. But you can see here when they fly, you really do see that white base to their tail. Here's the white on the wing feathers that we just saw. So right here, this white is showing up right here. And then, of course, especially from underneath, you're going to see a lot of white on their head and neck. When you see them from above, they have that black cap. So this one, I was coming back from Archibald Biological Station. I was actually doing some wildland firefighter training out there about a week and a half ago. And I'm in Sarasota. So as I'm driving back in the afternoon from Archibald, I'm basically driving on Route 70 and Route 72 from the eastern part of our state to our western part of our state, coming back to Sarasota, going through a lot of agricultural area. And so this is prime place to see a caracara. If you haven't ever seen a caracara and you want to, oh my God. You used to be able to see them right around Myakka River State Park, which is on State Route 72, which is Clark Road, and then turns into that as you go east. But now, because there's so much development around the Myakka River area, there's a lot of road construction going on, a lot of housing going in. I have found that in the last, I would say 5 to 8 years, I'm not really seeing caracaras until I get much further east. So I think this one was it was between Arcadia and Myakka. So it's probably at least a good half hour further east from Myakka, but right on the side of the road. And this one was actually eating a deer. So there was a roadkill deer on the side of the road, and this one was having a huge meal. Often you'll see them eating, other roadkill that is smaller, like raccoons or armadillos or something like that. But this one actually had a big meal. And so I disturbed it from its meal. I didn't realize that's what it was eating until I got a little bit closer. I disturbed it and it flew. And then here it is, because they do like to perch on fence posts. So it was doing exactly what I'm telling you guys it does. But this is a great photo because once again, you can really see how bright white that tail is. Maybe you can imagine how I could have been confused. Maybe not, but flying far above me when I've never seen them that high up in the sky with all that white. I was thinking bald eagle when I saw it over by Lake Okeechobee. Here it is when it landed. So you can really see, even in a not great photo from a distance, it's really obvious. They have those naked yellowish legs. They have that featherless orange facial skin there, as well as that white neck with that black cap. They're just so unique and cool looking. Here it is then flying, because of course I kept trying to get a little bit closer and better photos. So of course it didn't want to have anything to do with me. So I took a few more photos of it flying away, and then I left so that it could go back to its meal. It didn't go very far away because it knew it had a good source of food. So I left pretty quickly so it could go back to eating. But once again, you really see in flight how obvious those white patches are on its tail and wings. And here's more of a side view. You see those primary flight feathers with the white on the tail, and then you still can even see the obvious white on the neck. All right, so a few more slides about caracaras. We're gonna finish it up in about 5-ish minutes, and then there'll be time for Q&A. But here's a juvenile caracara. So you see when they're young, excuse me, when they're young, they are much more brown. Their skin that is featherless has not turned that bright yellow or orange yet. So they're much more drab when they are young. They are non-migratory residents here in Central Florida and in areas in Texas. Otherwise, they live throughout Central and South America. They fly low. They're often found walking on the ground or perching on fence posts. So very different behavior than a lot of our other raptors, especially of our falcons. But they have been shown in research and in looking at DNA that they are that they are a falcon. They prefer open land spaces, so often you're going to find them around ranches and agricultural areas. And the place I was in Lake Okeechobee, where I was a little confused by the ones that were flying so high, they are actually doing really well living around cattle ranches, whether that's cattle that are used eventually for meat, or whether it's dairy farming, because unfortunately sometimes we have some fatalities with the cows, and then that is just a great source of food for the caracaras. And that's what was going on with the one I saw. They had actually had a recent cow fatality. I think the day before, they had moved that cow to where they put cows when they die, and the caracaras were basically acting like they do and like vultures do, where they were getting carrion to eat. So they'll share carrion with vultures, and can be found in all those places I just talked about, as well as things like hen houses, garbage dumps, things like that. They will eat live prey, although they generally are going to eat carrion, but they'll eat live prey like insects, fish, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals. They are definitely generalists. They will eat whatever they can find. They do form year-round bonds and stay together for several years. They will actually live in family groups and will preen each other. So also sort of different behavior. They maintain strict territorial boundaries and will chase away intruders from their nesting sites. They do build a nest, so yet another way that they are different from our other falcons. So they will collect stems, twigs, and vines that they weave into a bulky nest with a shallow bowl, often in the tallest tree in the area. And those nests are quite large. They're more like the size of hawk and osprey nests. They're about 2 feet across, and they commonly will reuse and refurbish those nests year after year. They will lay 1 to 4 eggs once or twice a year. So I think I've already said this multiple times, but once again, just to remind you, we all get really excited if we see bird feathers or bird nests or eggshells in the wild, but all of that is protected by law. All Florida raptors, as well as all birds other than some game birds, are protected by both federal and state law. So you often need permits to either remove their nest, even unused nests, as well as to have any of those parts of birds. And here in Florida, our Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commissions are the ones that are going to issue any permits. So that would be the agency to contact if you had any questions or interest in any of this. All right, so we're winding up. So our monthly Wild Sarasota webinars occur in person like you're attending today, but also on demand at YouTube. If you want to quick pull out your phone or do a print screen snapshot of this slide, you will have that QR code, which takes you to our brand new Florida Wildlife webpage. And on that webpage, it has every webinar I have recorded and done, including this one will be up in a few weeks once we edit it. It's got blogs on there and other resources for information about all these different species that I talk about. And I can give you the link in the chat box in a second as well. And always like to put a word in about our local Audubon societies when I am doing bird webinars. So we are lucky here in Sarasota County to have 2 different Audubon societies. We have both the Sarasota Audubon Society up on Center Road within the celery fields, and over 247 different bird species have been sighted there. So it is basically an internationally known birding site. And then we also have our Venice Area Audubon Society down on Tamiami Trail in South County. And I think their nature center is probably still currently closed because it took on some hurricane damage, but they have this really interesting rookery there where birds will come and roost at sunset, and during nesting season it's a busy place. And then they also have bat houses. Unfortunately, a number of the bat houses were also damaged during the hurricane we had recently, but there are still 2 standing, and they're working to get the other 4 back up. So lots of different opportunities at our different Audubon societies, which of course have many classes as well, and people that can help you learn how to bird. My sources, a lot of the information for these bird webinars come directly from Cornell University's All About Birds website. So they've done tons of research about birds. They have great resources. If you want to hear the sounds that any of these birds make, they also have recordings of the bird calls on their websites. So just a wonderful place to go to learn more about birds. And of course, our national and state Audubon societies also have websites with amazing amounts of information. So I want to thank you for joining me today. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. My email is there on the slide.